for the Stage Managers Association Legacy Project. This is Patricia Sutherland Cohen, one of the founding members. Tonight's interview with Robert Cohen, a longtime founding member of the SMA and stage manager for so many different productions and all around the world in production manager, stage manager, and many other capacities. We'll hear about his fascinating journey in this Legacy Project interview. Hello, I'm sitting here and giving the interview with stage manager Robert I. Cohen. Good evening. How are you?
I am doing fine on this first real night of summer, it feels like.
Feels great. So we're doing this for the Legacy Project. So tell me more about your starting out. How did you start out with stage managing?
Well, it's a long, convoluted process. As an undergraduate in college, I was majoring in math and physics. However, there was a theater or drama club at that point, and many of the math majors joined it for some reason or another. And doing so, they were in a play, and I figured I'd follow suit to see what was happening. The play was directed by one of our English teachers, and I told her that I was a little bit interested in theater. I hadn't seen much, but I was primarily interested in writing. So she said the best way, or one of the best ways to learn to be a writer is to be a stage manager first. And how would you like to stage manage our two productions by Tennessee Williams? I think they were called Auto da Fe and Crucifixion, which I knew absolutely nothing about. And other than the fact that this guy Williams probably came from Tennessee and got this name Tennessee. So I went along for the ride, and she was really a mentor to me in that sense. She showed me everything about recording blocking and lighting cues and those kind of things. It said I had to record every movement that the actors made. And over the course of the rehearsal period, I compiled what was my first production book, or stab at a production book, with an awful lot of writing and more than one needed to know. And from there, I continued writing in this last year of college, and winning the New England Theater Conference playwriting contest, or one of the winners at least, for a one-act play, and had that play staged in my final year of college.
Oh, congratulations. What school were you in?
I was in Northeastern University, and at that point I decided to sort of chuck my mathematical career. I took a few courses in my last year and expressed my interest in directing, because I think I was more enamored or in love with this lady who was the English teacher, and figured, oh, well, this is the way I can get close to her.
Okay.
I don't think she was much older than me at that point. And so with the help of one of the teachers, another teacher there who had graduated from Boston University in the directing program, he was pretty influential in getting me in to pursue a master's degree in directing, which I really was interested in. And the only stage managing I did while pursuing my graduate degree was because they had situations where you all had to work backstage one way or another, and they put me on a show with actually an actor who eventually graduated and ended up winning a Tony Award. And there were a couple of other directors, but by the time I finished the program in 3 years, I had taken all of the theater courses they were offering, from movement to dance to fencing to acting, which I didn't particularly care for. I liked being behind the scenes. So after the 3-year program, one of the teachers was also the artistic director, founder of Theater Company of Boston. And thereupon, I spent a lot of time around that theater, going to plays, more interested in the dramaturgy, a word which I didn't even know then, but I knew how to push a broom. And the end result of it was they were bringing plays in from New York. I think it was Adaptation Next, which was with Elaine May and Jimmy Coco. They were looking for a local stage manager, and this particular teacher, David Wheeler, who headed up the Theater Company of Boston, where I had spent, as I said, a lot of time around, recommended me, and I ended up doing that show in 1960, in the 60s somewhere, late 60s. '68, and that was my foot in the door to equity. Thereafter, there weren't many more opportunities for me in the theater, so I spent some time over that summer stage managing at the Loeb Drama Center and meeting quite a few, I would say, high profile people that went on, from Stacy Keach to, the name is escaping me now, and I'll come back to it momentarily, but I got to stage manage 4 shows that summer. Thereafter, I spent the year teaching at Emerson College, teaching acting, as I said, something that I wasn't very fond of, as well as teaching drama criticism, and spent a year doing that and said, this is not for me. I felt like I was parroting everything that I learned back in graduate school without really knowing what I was saying, what I was doing, or what kind of advice was really beneficial to those. So thereupon, I decided that this is not for me, and went on to try to stage manage in the various theaters around Boston, as well as get directing jobs. And that was pretty problematic for somebody fresh out of graduate school, but it was sustaining. And thereafter, I landed a job in television, as I say, and ended up directing news and floor managing at WBZ in Boston, and did that for quite some time. But I really felt that I wanted to get back into theater. And I was sending out lots and lots and lots of, in those days, resumes. It was, you would flood the mails, you'd look at things like Backstage or the newspaper show business, trying to find out what might be coming into town or what might not be coming into town. And there was a theater company called the Chateau de Ville Dinner Theaters, and one of them landed on Jay Adler's desk. One of my letters landed on Jay Adler's desk. And I think the only thing that sparked his imagination, beside the fact that I was a person who wanted to stage manage for them, was that we both shared a Boston University background. He went to Boston University and got his degree in directing following my degree in directing. And he hired me at Chateau de Ville Dinner Theater, whereupon I spent over 4.5, 5 years doing something like 13 shows.
Wow.
And making contacts with directors coming out of New York, actors coming from all over the world, and getting to work with actors who were on the way up or the way down. And those who were on the way up, I got to work with any number of them over the next number of years. And at this point, actually, just remembering now, before getting to the Chateau de Ville and applying to that place, I had worked a summer at the Rochester Music Theater in Rochester, New Hampshire. And ironically, that was 50 years ago, pretty much to the day.
Wow.
And right now, at this particular point, some of the actors from Rochester are tracking down those of us that had our first summer in stock and trying to do a 50th anniversary reunion next year, which 1969 was our first year together, and 2019 is 50 years later.
And that was your stage managing work.
I stage managed at the Rochester Music Theater. I also got to try my hand at designing. I designed a production, scenic design of MAME. I ended up directing the final production of The Fantastics. So I was getting a real feeling for all of those theater kinds of backstage things. And as I say, it wasn't long after that summer that I ended up with the Theater Company of Boston, and then made the leap to the Chateau de Ville, which was a dinner theater chain. At that point, it was employing over 200 equity actors among their 5 different theaters in Connecticut, Windsor, Connecticut, and down in Rhode Island, as well as 3 in the Boston area. We would take a show from one theater to the other, so it meant that you were with a show anywhere from 5 to 6 months, which was great work, and you were building up your equity credits, getting your equity insurance. And as I say, I did about a dozen or 13 shows for the Chateau de Ville.
Oh, so working with the Chateau de Ville Theater, a chain. You're going from place to place to place. Tell us a little bit more about stage managing in different venues.
Well, that was probably one of the great experiences, being able to understand and take a show from theater to theater. In doing that, you would have to restage them to some extent, because they would go from a thrust stage to somewhat of a arena. Excuse me, in one of them, as a stage manager, I would be responsible for relighting the show. So I learned how to focus and relight a show, and change the blocking, because, as I say, the configurations were a little bit different. So that gave me a sense of somewhat still directing, but at the same time, I was stage managing and learning some of the backstage activities of making a show work, and giving the opportunity to live with a show from that 5 to 6 months was really my education. I must say, at that point in time, to the best of my knowledge, there still weren't any stage management courses in any of the colleges across the country. It took quite some time before that came to be. So my learning experience was learning by doing. So a lot of this took me through the period of the 1970s. I was married, raising a family, having worked at WBZ and as a director, as I said, for a couple of years there, and then spent those 5 years at the Chateau. But I was getting restless. I wanted to get closer to new shows, and my interest naturally was leading me toward New York.
So, what brought you to New York?
Well, as I say, working at the Chateau, I was investigating more and more, and again, like we all did in those days, send letters and letters and letters. Um, a show was coming into the Charles Playhouse, where I had some stage management experience, and it was a Broadway show that had much success in New York, and they wanted to do a sit-down production of this show, Don't Bother Me, I Can't Cope, and they wanted to hire a local stage manager. So this was my opportunity to leave the Chateau and work on Don't Bother Me, I Can't Cope, which turned out to be almost a year's run at the Charles Playhouse in Boston, and put me in touch with the American Theater Company, which mounted touring shows around the country. And that gave me my foot in the door to sort of move to New York. The company manager of that show was a very successful company manager off Broadway. And once Don't Bother Me, once Cope closed, I sort of moved to New York, not did move to New York, but kept going back and forth to New York and staying with this company manager, who also was doing shows off Broadway, and he provided me the opportunity to do a show at the Astor Place Theater called Love, 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 with then director Buck Heller. And then one of these shows led to another show, and I did a whole series of off-Broadway shows, both there. The Chelsea West Side Theater put me in touch with Lucia Victor, who was one of the first Broadway stage managers, director, stage managing under her. And I did a whole slew of off-Broadway shows with anybody, like from Peter Gennaro to Wendy Kesselman. Worked on Lonnie Price's first shows. He earned his equity card on a show we did called Class Enemy off Broadway. And then we did another show at the Harold Clurman Theater. So one show led to another, and I was building quite a bit of an off-Broadway resume. And while doing, I think it was Rommel's Garden at the Clurman Theater, directed by Jack Garfine, who is still around with us, and the situation led to he was going to take shows to Israel. And so at that point, I was tapped by Jack to do these shows, take a bunch of shows, Samuel Beckett plays, to Israel. So being tapped to stage manage these plays, which Alan Schneider directed, we took Endgame to Israel, and the three Beckett plays to Israel, Peter Evans and Alvin Epstein. So this was, as I say, moving up through the off-Broadway circuit. I pretty well established myself and got to do a lot of the off-Broadway shows during the 1980s. And once again, Jay Alda stepped into my life, being friends since our chateau days. And there was the opportunity. He noticed that they were looking for a stage manager down in Atlantic City at the Tropicana, and pointed out this ad to me in backstage. And he says, "You know, you're the perfect person. You've toured places around the world already with shows. You've done a lot of off Broadway. You have a great sense of all of the workings behind. Apply for the job." Well, I went down there in somewhere around August of 1987 and got this job that kept me there from September of 87 to September of 97, 10 whole years. This was a completely different situation than calling a show or putting together new shows. But what it meant was every week I had a new different kind of act and different kind of show. And this was really where I think my learning experiences up to that point just mushroomed. I was able to work with an incredible crew of technicians. We would do shows like an ice show one summer. We would do a Bowser doo-wop show one summer. We bring in headliners from Tony Bennett to Tony Orlando to Johnny Mathis. We would do magic shows with various top-notch magicians like Blackstone. At that point, we would do any number of one-night shows coming in from Earth, Wind, and Fire with fireworks or Penn and Teller. And somewhere in the middle there, we got approached to do a first stage version of American Bandstand. And so I met with Dick Clark and the producers, and they hadn't had a writer, so I ended up writing the show as well as actually stage managing the show. And that ran over the course of one summer with Bobby Rydell as the host and various guest stars coming in. And that fulfilled my writing wants. And through that whole 10-year period, working with major stars or large shows and solving all kinds of problems from a thing like the horse show that we did, doing that horse show medieval times where we had to turn the whole stage. And this was the first time this was done outside of an arena, bringing tons of sand inside of the theater. And then the way our stage was, it was up on the third floor, and I mentioned that the stage was bigger than Radio City. We had a elevator that dropped out in the middle of the stage, which was you were able to put a tractor trailer on. It was 20 by 20 feet or something like that. And we would bring tons of sand in, and then we'd bring the horses up. But every night we had to shovel the sand out of the way and take the horses out to a farm. And similarly with the ice capades, there too, we had to make sure we had everything in the building before we could freeze the ice and run that show for that summer. So that was quite a feat and learning experiences through those 10 years. And then once again, getting restless, it was time to end my life there.
I bet with all of these different experiences, are there any stories that you can tell that are safe to tell?
Well, there are safe stories. I might have to jump back a little bit.
Okay.
After working sort of my off-Broadway shows, I was felt I was ready to make the leap to Broadway, and there was this show kicking around in development called Beatlemania. Again, through writing letters, I noticed that one of the producers, the lead producer, was Steve Lieber. Now, Steve and I were fraternity brothers when I was an undergraduate at Northeastern. I didn't have much contact with Steve thereafter, but those of you who might know Steve, he went to work for William Morris. He was very instrumental in booking Aerosmith and the Rolling Stones. While we were in college, he would book the local rock clubs, and that's where he got his start. And over the years, as I say, we lost contact. But when I noticed he was doing Beatlemania, I gave him a nod, and there was my first chance to work on Broadway through Steve. He hired me as an ASM. And I think this is probably one of the few, if only, times I ever worked as an ASM. Throughout my career, I have been the PSM on most of my shows or the lead in some capacity or another. Well, Beatlemania, as I say, backtracking, gave me 4 years on Broadway and more national tours. We had as many as 5 companies out there. So I had taken the show quite extensively back and forth across the United States, back and forth across Canada. And that was, again, another big learning experience. Working in that show, I had the privilege of working with Jules Fisher, and because the stage manager would go out with the show and relight it in all different situations, it was great working with Jules all those years, working with his plots all those years. And through all of this, I got to, as I say, there are many more national shows that I got to do for American theater productions, such as Noises Off, originating shows on Broadway, such as The News, and moving up to taking shows like Electra from regional theater from the McCarter. So, in planning a stage management career, you can't really, or at least I couldn't, plan. And I don't know if anybody can literally plan their next move. It's the best word of advice I can say is to keep working. And if you work, you always are in demand. And that became my situation. I would pretty much go from one show to another in different capacities as a production manager or as a stage manager, one way or another. I pretty much stayed employed throughout the 80s and 90s in this business in one capacity or another as a production coordinator, somewhere in there. So as you can see, it was hopscotching here, there, and everywhere, doing off Broadway, Broadway, Atlantic City. And while I was in Atlantic City during the early 80s, the again, Jay Adler stepped into the picture. I had come back from Atlantic City, I guess, for a weekend or something like that. And Jay started telling me, well, there's this group of stage managers that are thinking of forming an association. As you might know, most of us work in isolation. We may know our assistant stage manager or a couple of others, but for the most part, at that point in time, I think most of us were working alone and solving our own problems. And so, in solving our own problems, we didn't always have the answers. So it really was a situation where you had to work things out one way or another, and you got to be pretty diplomatic because we're problem solvers. And in doing that, you'd run up against the wall sometimes and really want to know how to do things. Well, as I say, Jay mentioned these stage managers were getting together and drinking, and at that point in time, shows were coming in and out of New York, and we decided to start meeting with stage managers of other shows.
That's great. And this beginning of the SMA, tell us more about your involvement in those early days of the SMA.
Well, my mind was open, I must say. It was like, whoa, there are others of us that are doing this, and others have answers. And at the same time, around then, the really kickoff point was there was a show called Mass Appeal, and I think someone like Bill McComb, who was stage managing that off Broadway, the show was moving to Broadway, and they weren't going to take him. So here we are in a situation with the union and trying to gain a toehold. Why should we do all of this work, as I say, we the stage managers, and not go along and reap the benefits of it? The other people involved in that can be a little more able to tell more who were actually involved in Mass Appeal. But we, as a group of stage managers, wanted the management representation in AE Council and so forth. And we bandied together and eventually got the vote at the Booth Theater, where we were something like 300 stage managers, packed that and got equity to approve of stage managers on console. My own involvement in our own association was getting involved in various committees, along with many of the other stage managers, Peter Lawrence, myself, Peter Taylor, and a few others. We got to meet, and Jane Neufeld who was instrumental in that Mass Appeal. What I was getting to say was Peter and a few of us got to pull ourselves together and get together a newsletter, or the headset, which we published for some time. We hammered out a constitution for our organization. Now, this is all around 1981. We were meeting like every 3 weeks in bars or restaurants and smoke-filled rooms. And this was our professional community getting together and networking. And I look back on there's so many other stage managers who assisted me through the years and succeeded in their own careers beyond my wildest dreams, and I'm sure some of theirs. Through it all, what it taught me, I think the lesson I took away from a lot of this is the mentoring process throughout that. And it brought us to a point today where we see so many of us are passing the torch along and bringing other stage managers into the fold. I can't begin to say how much I am proud of the SMA for opening this door to me, and me being able to open this door to so many others. As a founding member and as a past chair for a number of years and vice chair for a number of years, I find myself looking in the mirror today and remembering back then when, I see these older stage managers and they'd say how venerable they are. Well, I look in the mirror now and I say, I'm one of the venerable ones.
Well, in fact, tell us a little bit more about how stage management has changed from when you first started.
Well, earlier on I said there probably wasn't a course in the country. And now we see not only undergraduate courses, we see master's degrees in it. Karen Carpenter, I have to say, probably started the first master's degree program at Yale University. Karen, when she was coming up in the business and I was out touring, she was in college at Boston University. Whenever I would come through town, I remember I would invite students to observe me, and Karen was one of those at Boston University when I was out on tour with Beatlemania back there in the 80s. And I think she always says that was kind of where she got the bug to stage manage. And since then, she's gone on to be a Broadway director herself. There are any number of students throughout that. Somewhere around the early aughts, I had been stage managing for about 40 operas at New York City Opera. I was production stage manager at that point. And once again, getting restless, I decided this is toward the end of my actual stage management career. What am I going to do next? New York, at that point in 2002, I decided to apply to Brooklyn College and ended up starting a stage management program there. For want of better or worse, it struggled, but we did turn out any number of student stage managers who I am extremely proud of, that are out there in the world right now, stage managing or production managing, places like the Alvin Ailey Company and various other major ones. Off Broadway, there's quite a few stage managers around in the regions. I have quite a few of my former students from that decade. And to put a sort of capstone on my career, as I say, not actively stage managing since New York City Opera. What happened just more recently, one of my prize students, who I mentored through, He's turned to starting a production company of his own, as well as providing light equipment around all the world. We just collaborated. He hired me to production stage supervise a production of Traviata at Lincoln Center, which we did this past March.
So back to La Traviata and opera.
Back to opera and La Traviata. And this was $1 million production. We brought over 75 youngsters, high school age ladies who formed our chorus from Fukushima, survivors of the tsunami. The chorus were American singers. I should say the chorus men were former choristers of the New York City Opera. The principals were from around this country, and an 80-piece orchestra with lasers and 3D and so forth. And it was literally budgeted for $1 million for 2 performances. Yeah. So my life in the theater has come full circle in many different ways, passing, as I say earlier, passing on the torch and being happy that I've had an incredible life in the theater in many different ways, from actually stage managing and community theater to off-Broadway to New York City Opera to production managing to coordinating Lincoln Center Festival for close to a decade. It's been a varied and wonderful career, and I wouldn't trade my life for any other career.
Well, I see that's why Brooklyn College also called you Professor Emeritus, as you did get a chance to retire from them. But in the meantime, you've also had a book out about the theater. Talk to us a little bit more about the production book.
As I said, for those of you who are tuning in early on, I did have this penchant for writing, and over the years had written a number of plays, successfully or unsuccessfully staged in small situations, continuing to write and being interested in primarily ideas. And that's one of the things that really I've enjoyed about theater is each play is another world. And I just didn't say, okay, light cue 1, go, sound cue A, go. I was more or mostly interested in why or the what of this play was. And I think that harkens back to my own life as a mathematician and physicist, proving theories and figuring out how they work. So since retiring, I've written a couple of books, one on a physicist, Nikola Tesla, and just within the last few months released a book, a textbook that Focal Press has published called Introduction to Theater, Creating Theater on Stage, Backstage, and Offstage. So that kind of thing has gotten my interest, and hopefully it's doing well. I will not know for almost until the end of this year how sales go. People are always asking, well, how's the book doing? In this industry, in the publishing industry, you don't know until it's been out there for some time.
Well, you know about teaching, though, because you used a lot of your ideas in your book were from your teaching. Talk to us a little bit more about what you did with teaching theater.
Well, in teaching, I would try to create exercises that demonstrated what lighting design is, or what a lighting designer primarily goes through, or a sound designer, or anybody on the so-called organizational chart from the gopher on up to the producer, what or how they function within the realm of teaching. And a lot of these exercises are interactive in the book with the internet. So if you go to a chapter on, we'll say, costume design, there's a whole set of web links that link you to costume designers talking about their work, or going through the process of their work, and so forth. So that was the mandate from Focal Press, that it not just be words on a page, but more so this kind of interaction, which brings us into the 21st century, which is really a whole different realm of learning than when I set out to do by doing.
So tell us a little bit more about teaching theater and using all those experiences before you even got to the book. You were teaching at Brooklyn College?
Yeah. Teaching at Brooklyn College, having worked for over 30 years in the theater, I think a lot of teaching comes by relating stories about situations and how you solve those problems. Teaching was also, it took me beyond the classroom, and I think I'm somewhat indebted to Ellen Marie Kazel, who is our chairperson now. Ellen Marie and I worked together at Brooklyn Academy of Music when she first started out in the business. And we've maintained a friendship over the years. And she herself is very instrumental in the whole idea of the educational process. And when she sort of hooked up with USITT back in the early 80s, she invited me along to help start the stage management mentoring project, which I eagerly embraced. And over the years, I've probably participated in anywhere from 6 to 8 of these annual mentoring process at the USITT annual conference. In doing so, Ellen Marie has been able to bring in and attract many of the SMA members to come in as mentors. And I think this is, one of the more important things in the realm of the education process and networking process for early career stage managers, building up their learning ability and learning how to engage in problem solving, as well as to meet many of us along the way. Uh,
It sounds like that would be the kind of advice you would give to someone coming into the field. What would you advise a student, for example,
well,
coming into?
students, I would very much join an organization. Those that are in college to join an organization such as the SMA and network with the people and see how the various stage managers work in the field through an observation situation. Those are those that can afford to join USITT and get out there and go to that annual conference. It's really an eye opener, and to get engaged in it, where you actually are selected. There's only about 12 people who are actually selected each year to be part of the mentoring process. And at the conference, they get to stage manage special events, which is it's very rewarding in its sense that not everybody goes to Broadway. There may be 2 dozen Broadway shows, but the opportunities are so rich in so many other industries to manage events from, we'll say, la creme de la creme, the Super Bowl. You don't think of it as a stage management, but there are any number of people organizing and using the skills that we have, organizing major award shows such as the Tony Awards or the Emmy Awards or the Grammy Awards, or big celebratory parades, or we even had stage managers be event managers for congressional candidates, or even Hillary Clinton for that matter. So, or the US Open. And there's just a wealth of opportunity to apply those skills that you learn as a stage manager. It just doesn't mean you work in the theater. There's only a few of us that are most fortunate to have done it.
So now let me ask you about giving advice to yourself. If you could give a piece of advice to your own younger self, what would you have told your younger self?
Oh, that's a tough question. What would I have told? I didn't know what I would have been getting into. Um, I would have told myself that this was really a way of rewarding my curiosity more than anything. It's gave me the opportunity to, if I wanted to learn about the world, I can't think of a better exposure to enter the world of a different play at any given time, and not just say that's the play, that's what's on the page, but what's the backstory. And I became if I wanted to become a richer person, I couldn't have chosen a better career.
Great. Thank you so much. Is there anything else that you'd like to add? Is there anything else? Thank you so much in getting all of this wealth of information, both to yourself and to all of us. Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
In a sense, yes. Um, don't think that you can rush in there and be quick to answer or have the answers. There are so many other people out there that know more than you know. Your best or strongest ability is to listen Listen well, think, and weigh the options before you speak and act. Uh, I can't begin to tell you how many situations where you're sitting there in a rehearsal room or out front at the production desk, and some of the ideas that go back and forth may seem the most outrageous to you, but just listen and let them work it out sometimes. You may not have you may have the correct answer, but until you've garnered the respect of the people around you on a slow, quiet, intimate, head-to-head conversation, listen and then communicate.
Thanks. We've been listening to Robert Cohen, and we continue to listen to your good advice. Thank you.